Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for coming out tonight. If you can make your way to a seat and actually grab a drink and pizza while it's warm.
Everybody move up front.
Yes, please up front.
You sit over where you want to
David? Ben, how you doing? So as our speaker pointed out, it's raining like crazy outside. A lot of people may have been scared by the hail report, but that's not affecting the entirety of what we call Austin. It may affect some places called Cedar Park and Leander, but at least this place has covered parking. I don't have that at home, so I figure I'm safe. It's been I guess since 2008 since Austin's had a really good hailstorm. You know, when the fixer-uppers of the divots and the smashed-in windshields will start putting signs up on the score, and I'm intentionally trying to upset you while you're eating and drinking beer. But thanks for coming out tonight. My name's John Henderson, and I'm not the guy who bought you the beer and pizza tonight. That would be Gordon Walton, who just stepped out. So once he gets back to the door, everyone give him a hand. But hold on a second, I'll tell you when that is. What we're going to do tonight is I'm going to introduce the speaker a little bit, but we're going to start off something that has been a demand of a lot of people who are seeking jobs. There's the job seekers and the job havers, or the job givers, the job haves and the job have-nots. And one of the most important things to do in a networking event such as this is to let those people come together. But anyway, Gordon Walton, wig one.
That clap, all you have to do is buy the beer.
All right. he could probably even budget it out for you. But so let's. I'm going to call on someone, and please, if you can, think about how much time it takes for you to say your name, your specialty, the name of your website, and whether you have business cards. And if you do not have business cards, I am prepared to clown you. Because this is a networking event, what the hell? Bring business cards. So, does anyone here, I'll start on this side, anyone here looking for a job? Please stand up.
So, I own a company looking for contract work, always. We're called Hyperkinetic Studios. We are hyperkineticstudios.com, and I do have business cards.
What's your name?
Rich.
Rich. Very good.
Thank you for.
So you're actually a job haver giving her away.
Well, I think we're a little bit of both.
Okay. Do you have a specialty of what your business is?
We do games. We do apps.
There's a lot of things in those categories. Right?
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
So we do VR, AR stuff, and
Okay.
just regular games as well.
All right.
Thanks.
Anyone else on this side of the room looking for a job or having a job? Please stand up.
Hey, my name is Casey. I've been working on an indie game for quite a while, and I'm looking to expand the team. It's just a rev share project, so if anybody's interested in doing a rev share project in the free time, let me know.
Okay. You did bring business cards right now.
I have business cards.
Very good. He was here last time and I clowned him, so it works. A little bit of direct shame in the right amounts. You don't want to crush them utterly. All right, anyone on this side of the room? Sure. Bradley.
Hi, I'm Bradley Johnson, formerly of Certain Affinity. I am a concept artist. I've been working for more than 18, 19 years now in video games and other things, but I make stuff up. Occasionally people pay me. If you have a project that you'd like me to help you develop, then let me know. I do have business cards, but I think they're kind of old-fashioned.
Works in person, you know, we're not using the internet here.
I'm also Bradley, but I'm not an artist. I'm a software engineer, a lot of experience in the game industry, and I do have business cards this time.
Very good. So, Randall.
I'm Randall Robbins. I do project management, Scrum, and also lean business development. I'm looking for contract work for those things, and I have business cards.
Moving on back. Please stand up. You guys are doing great.
My name is Jeremy, and I'm a musician, actually. I'm looking to compose music for video games.
Very good.
In short.
Business card.
Yes, I do.
Okay, very good. It's important to let people know that you have them, so. All right, anyone else on this side of the room? I mean, it's not absolutely necessary that you stand up, but I do appreciate you doing it. And you're brave, by the way, facing your fears with aplomb. All right, so, well, thanks again for everyone making it out and inclement weather being what it is. Again, the problem is not the weather itself, but all the Austin people driving on it and losing their minds often the time. So I'm going to now introduce our speaker, who is actually the person you probably came to see tonight. Not myself.
You said you were talking about the news?
Oh yeah, well, I guess there's some things that are worth noting because there's stuff that had happened in Austin. Probably the biggest game to come out of Austin for quite some time, Prey, released by Arcane Studios last week. Very good, and multiple platforms, and actually our speaker's company actually co-developed. Is that called co-developed?
We didn't know. We just helped them out tiny
Helping
bit.
right. There's a lot of people credited for
Very tiny bit.
Okay, very good. By your standards, okay. All right. There was some news just this week about BioWare and how the Montreal studio, who had just shipped Andromeda, was going to reassess some things. Well, they're mostly focused on fixing a lot of uncomfortable bugs that shipped with it and not on the sequel. But what came out in a stockholders meeting from the EA president was that the BioWare's next action title, which will be disruptive, is going to be delayed. What they didn't say is that's BioWare Austin's project. So think about all the people who are working here in Austin on whatever that is. And no, I don't know what it is. It's just something besides, this is the studio that shipped Star Wars The Old Republic, and they did some work on both Dragon Age Inquisition as well as Andromeda, but they would like to have another project they can call their own. But the other thing that came out in the news this week was that Alchemy Labs has been acquired by Google. So, that's good. Makers of Job Simulator and Rick and Morty VR virtual reality, which is like Job Simulator but with the voice of Justin Roiland. And actually the entire development team, all the owls, actually got to contribute some voiceover that you get to unlock by, I guess, going through purgatory. Saying it's a Rick and Morty thing.
Finding tapes.
Finding tapes in purgatory. Very Bioshock-like. And also this week, Uncle Warren Spector announced through a presentation through their publisher Starbreeze Studios, development on System Shock 3 is being done here in Austin by the Austin office of Other Side Entertainment. Some people that we know, Jason Hughes is the director. I don't know Arturo. He used to work at Junction Point for Warren. He is the lead artist on that, and Sheldon Picotti is the lead designer, and he was lead writer in the first two Deus Ex games. So again, that's the core team, and they did release a lot of really cool concept art that I believe Arturo must have done. And you know, speaking of all the hype that Prey got, and people pointing out that it's like Bioshock in space, well, that would make it System Shock. But now this is actually a System Shock game that's been made here in Austin.
I was just going to add to that. I saw you said you're a software engineer. They're hiring a software engineer for System Shock right now. So
Yeah.
I saw it on LinkedIn. So.
That is the thing that everyone ought to know about, is that game development is in fact software development, so you're kind of always going to need coders for that. But not to discourage all the people who are doing design and artwork too. They'll just need you until they don't. Hey, you know what, you know where you live in. I don't have to tell you this stuff. All right. You
So
hyped
the
up
Dennis
yet?
Miller news session is over, right?
What's that?
The Dennis Miller news section of the.
Yeah, I'm not going to say that.
Okay.
Well, it's really just building up the hype for everyone, and everyone is, and also the people who are walking in, because again, we, as previously noted, yes, this is in fact the Video Game Makers Unite, and please have yourself a drink and find yourself a seat. There's actually a bunch of them still up front, so I feel justified in wasting your time.
John, thanks for all the news. You're on top of everything, as usual.
And I wrote it really small, so if you didn't bring your glasses, you probably can't read it. But if you can read this here at the top, ATX Game Dev Calendar. That is the Twitter account that also points to a Facebook account, which also points to a Google Doc. And that's updated week to week and month to month with all the stuff that the organizer, who is not me, knows about on a regular basis. So it's a good reminder that we live in Austin. There's stuff going on all the time. It's actually part of the challenge of living here, is deciding what to do on any given night. But we're all glad that you decided to spend your night with us tonight. Anything else, Gordon? Am I missing anything? I ask you as you take a bite of pizza.
Rock and roll.
Excellent. All right, well, our speaker tonight is founder, leader, titan of industry in Austin. Part owner of the largest independently owned employer of game developers in Austin. And when they move into their new offices on North Lamar and 183, they will be the first company since Origin to own their own building. Does that sound right?
Sounds good to me.
Anyway, Max Hoberman from Certain Affinity.
Thank you, John. Yeah, that sounds about right. I don't know, someone can verify that, whether any game dev shops have
Most people
actually owned
lease.
their own facility.
Edge, right?
but,
Edge. Didn't Edge buy their own?
No, they didn't.
No,
No, they didn't.
they're on lease.
I'm certainly not aware of any, so yeah, if that's true, then I'd be very happy to hear that. But a little bit of introduction, but let me start with a big caveat here, which is this talk today is an experiment. I feel like I've done a lot of talks over the years, and every single time, without exception, I prepare like hell. I always have slides. Everything I'm doing flows really naturally because I've rehearsed it and put it on slides, and everything is so structured and wonderful. It's glorious. That ain't tonight. That's not going to happen. Today is my experiment with just stream of consciousness. So we're just going to go. We're going to talk. Hopefully I can keep you all entertained. I forgot to ask for caffeine on my rider.
Oh,
So
wow.
we got beer and pizza, so it's close. But I've also, by the way, I've also been awake since 2 a.m., as my wife, who's sitting in the back, also with Certain Affinity, can attest. So this is the end of a long day, but I'll try and keep you all entertained. So first, introduction, and I think this is important. We'll add a little bit to what John said. I think it's important if you don't already know who I am. I assume if you're here, you might have some idea, but maybe not. So a little bit of introduction, and the reason I'm going to do this is because everything else I'm going to say will matter a whole hell of a lot more and be a lot more interesting if you understand who I am. Otherwise, you're going to be bored out of your mind. So as John said, Max Hoberman, I'm the founder of Certain Affinity. Certain Affinity is the largest independent developer here in Austin. We've been around for 10, going on 11 years now. Growing company. We've grown every year for 10 years. What do we do? We're primarily co-development for big FPS games. So we've put out 25 different titles that we've been part of in our history. A couple original ones, little small games, Age of Booty, Crimson Alliance, some fun little side projects. But the vast majority of what we do is co-development for big FPS. So we've probably shipped, I've lost count, 5 or 6 different Call of Duty games that we've helped out on. Sometimes a few maps here and there, sometimes owning the entirety of the multiplayer for it. Stuff like that. We've probably shipped 4 or 5 Halo games. We did all the multiplayer for Doom, it's Left 4 Dead, things like that. Just a few little projects. So we've really built a name for ourselves, doing this high dev co-work, and we're in transition. We're transitioning not only to a new building, we actually bought our own building, but we're transitioning to more and more, original work. So right now we have 4 projects in development in the studio. 2, can't say what they are, but co-dev type projects, the type of things I was just mentioning, but different. And then we've got 2 completely original titles. So it's a fun time for the company. It's a fun transitional time. There's this 10-year window of running Certain Affinity. But the talk tonight is supposed to focus on, all right, so I've been doing that for 10 years, running this company, completely independent, very successful developer. How on earth did I get there? How did I get to that point? And I think more specifically, a little more focused on how did I even get to game development? And that's what I want to talk about. So shifting back a decade before that, my 10 years prior to starting Certain Affinity, the entirety of my game dev career, I worked at Bungie. So I worked at Bungie when it was an independent, self-published developer out of Chicago. I worked at Bungie all through the Halo years at Microsoft, acquisition and all of that. And I was I didn't start out in development. I'll back up and I'll explain that. I was yeah, you guys come on up, grab a seat, don't be shy. Grab pizza, beer, make yourselves at home. So I didn't start out like that. I started out actually on the marketing and publishing side at Bungie. And of my 10 years at Bungie, I actually worked for 5 years, marketing, publishing, websites, all that stuff, community management. And I finally made the shift to full-time development. And from that point on, my second half of my tenure at Bungie, I was the multiplayer and online lead for the Halo games. So I in charge of everything multiplayer and online for Halo 2 and Halo 3. I'm sure a few of you have played those. Helped design the Xbox Live service, et cetera, et cetera. So, so I've done some pretty cool stuff. And the talk tonight is really, what led me up to that point 5 years in at Bungie where I made the shift. But backing up, what even led me to getting my foot in the door at Bungie and equipped me, at least by my own reckoning, to go on and be a very successful game designer and obviously, ultimately, I feel like a pretty successful business owner. I don't have to wear a suit and tie to work, and for me that's success, so awesome. So, all right, so I'm going to back up, and given all of that context, hopefully I won't bore you with going way back. So I was thinking a little bit ahead of time, thinking about, all right, how the hell do you stand up here and talk? Of course, my wife, who's a great speaker, is like, it's easy, just talk about yourself. I'm sure that's easy, right? Just talk about yourself. So we all know that ain't so easy. So I decided I'm gonna give it a really structured approach. So bear with me. We're gonna start at the beginning. The beginning is interesting though. So it's not what you would expect. For a guy who grew up making shooters and multiplayer games and software and video games, I was actually child of the mid-70s, and I was born on a all-vegetarian hippie commune in Tennessee. So the largest commune in the U.S. at its peak, I think when I was probably 2 or 3 years old, at its peak, it had over 1,400 people. I think about half of them which were kids. I actually lived in a big house with probably more than a dozen other families when I was 2, 3, 4 years old. Went from there, so very, very unusual upbringing. This is long before computers or video games or anything else. Went from there, moved briefly to San Francisco, and my father, who's been a big influence, he was in charge of trying to start up the soy ice cream fad, which right now, soy ice cream's awesome. Back in the 70s, soy ice cream wasn't awesome. So they were cutting edge, trying to bring soy ice cream to the world. They were fighting the government, they were fighting the dairy industry. It wasn't pretty. So interesting beginnings, but eventually when I was 6 years old, came to Austin. So part of this is also, I say I'm an Austin native. I think that's about as close as you can get. So I moved here literally, I think, a month or two before the Great Labor Day flood. If anyone remembers that took out the Whole Foods down Lamar, all that chaos. But I was like 6 years old, 5, 6 years old. So anyway, fast forward a little bit. So early hippie upbringing, still part of the commune here in Austin until my introduction into the other world, and that was in 3rd grade. 3rd grade was the first time I ever went to public school. Homeschooled with a bunch of other hippie kids. Before that, you guys come on and make room.
Yes.
And I went to public school. As I'm sure you all can imagine, that was a jarring transition. One of the reasons I bring up these details for you guys is because the way I look at it, I later on went on to run a business, to be the leader of an organization, to be a multiplayer online designer, to be a social systems designer. So there's all these interesting elements that go into who I am and how I became what I am. So going back a little bit, eventually I started going to public school. I'll give you guys a sense of how awkward going to public school was. The day before I went to 3rd grade, first ever public school, I needed to get a haircut. I had a ponytail. I didn't think I'd ever had a haircut before. My haircut was my mom tied a braid, snipped it off with the scissors. That was my haircut. So it was a rough transition, but I'll bring this around to video games eventually. So changed schools after that, went to another school, and I made a couple of friends. So new school, I made 2 friends, and At that same time, this is a very pivotal time in my life, I also played with my first computer ever. So I don't know what schools are like these days for elementary schools, but our school back then had one computer in the library. I think it was an Apple IIe maybe, and it was awesome. We'd go there, me and these two friends would go there, play games like nobody's business. I don't even remember anything but Oregon Trail, but I'm sure we played other things. There were probably 3 or 4 at the time. So we started playing early video games, and there's this fascinating moment in time where we started programming in BASIC, just as in 5th grade. So got on the computer, we'd all go to the library, we started programming in BASIC, and we decided that we were going to make a video game, which is awesome, right? This is a sign of things to come. So we made what essentially amounts to a choose-your-own-adventure, text-based choose-your-own-adventure type game. And while I would love to say that this was this beautiful beginning of this awesome passion for game design and all these other things, it wasn't really that. What it was, we made a choose-your-own-adventure game that was really for our own fun, not for the players' fun. Basically, whatever path you chose in the game, no matter what, it was also not some existential commentary, but you would die. There was no path that led to anything except for death. We would then subsequently bring in all sorts of people, including our teacher, one-on-one, to play test our game. They would inevitably die, and it was basically a practical joke, and we would roll on the floor laughing. So that was my not the best approach to design. Just if anyone's looking for advice, I don't do what I did. Man, that was my first foray into video games. Shortly after that, I got my first computer, which was a Mac Plus. And I was in love. So I had some drawing skills. Somewhere I got a copy of Mac Paint. I went to town and I played video games like nobody's business. So it's really interesting to look back at those two friends, those two really good friends I had in elementary school, and the formative influence that they had on me. One of them, so I was this hippie kid. I wasn't allowed. There's no guns in the house. My dad brought home a BB gun once. My mom got rid of it immediately. None of that stuff. But one of these friends, he introduced me to, playing with guns, playing with G.I. Joe. He introduced me to firecrackers and the wonders of gunpowder. He also introduced me to film. So I honestly don't think I ever, at this age, I wouldn't have seen Aliens. I wouldn't have discovered, in the child of the 80s, the magic of Arnold Schwarzenegger, for any children of the 80s here that know what I'm talking about. I would not have discovered all these wonderful things, Aliens for that matter. I watched it on the living room at his house. So that was one friend. The other friend, he was my path to vice, we'll say. Firecrackers aside, that wasn't vice, that was just good plain fun. So the other friend, he was actually my source for a few things. So first of all, he was the only person that I knew in the world that didn't have a Mac. He had this thing called a Commodore, which was pretty cool. So I got to play some games that weren't just crappy ports mostly. There were a few original games on the Mac, but not many. So he introduced me to that side, and in my world that was the dark side back then. Anyone who didn't have a Mac was really bad. He also introduced me to Dungeons and Dragons, which we know, especially in the 80s, that was a real vice, right? The debate was heating up about whether it was evil and we were all gonna, children of the devil and all that stuff. So he introduced me to vice, but the last vice that he introduced me to. So his father, he had one of those jobs that I never wanted to have. He had one of those jobs that you have to wear a suit and tie for, get up every day, go in 9 to 5. To this day, I actually have no idea what my friend's dad did for a living. All I know is that he went to work, and when he got home, he had this magic thing called a modem at work. And when he got home, he would bring floppy disk after floppy disk full of pirated games for the Mac, and he would give them to me. And it was awesome. It was fantastic. So in this way, I'm not sure I ever actually bought any games, sad to say, but I played a lot of games. Everything that was available I played. And I played one game that was, to this day, I still cite. I'm sure people at Certain Affinity are sick of hearing me talk about one of my all-time favorites, which was Ultima 3. Absolutely loved it. The first role-playing game I ever actually finished and completed. I had a little bit of attention deficit disorder, I theorize. But I loved it. It was awesome. Unfortunately, I don't think that I knew at the time that the creators of that game were here in Austin. I wish I had. It would have been interesting, but I loved it. So played that, played a bunch of other games. All right, fast forward. Next time that I touched any kind of video game development was middle school. My little group of 3 friends happened to meet up with another little group of 3 friends, and we all became friends, and now we could play some real D&D because we had 6 people. It was awesome. So in addition to that, first time I ever took a computer science class. So I partnered up with one of my guys. He was super smart. He actually knew how to program when the rest of us were, myself included, were pretty much idiots. And he and I decided we were going to make a game in middle school. He was in 7th grade. So we made a game on the Apple IIe, I think they were still using Apple IIes back then, that I did all the pixel art, animated pixel art for him, because I was an artist and I was getting into art and animation and all that. He did all the programming. We basically made a game where you had a little bird that would flap its way across the screen, and there were targets on the ground below in buildings, and you try and poop on them. So that was our game. That was my next foray into video game development. But again, it didn't really go anywhere. It was a fun little project in class, and it was done. And I spent most of high school playing D&D, from in the sense of anything related, in any way to video game development. So what's interesting about that, however, is that of these 6 guys, we would all take turns. Everybody would take a turn, run in a dungeon they bought, something they made, you name it. And I would say everyone took turns, and I pretty much ran everything with my own worlds and dungeons I created from scratch, about 50% of the total time. So it was good. It was really good. And over time, we actually went back. I think at the time we were on Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. There was no basic for true players. We were on Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2.0 maybe? I don't even remember. We completely tore it apart, rewrote all the rules, redesigned all of the systems. And that was really my first foray into anything that would approximate systems design. It was a really good experience, though. You eat your own dog food, to use that software industry term. We make the system, then we play, and then we go back afterwards and we talk about how broken it is, and we basically iterate, and we're never done with it. It's this infinite project. So welcome to systems design. Awesome. But it was good. It was a good learning experience. So, all right. So I'm going to pause for a second because I want to introduce a little bit of the supporting cast of characters that I'm talking about in my story. So the friend who introduced me to movies, to firecrackers, to guns, all that stuff, he went on. He's actually a very successful English professor now. So interesting. The friend who introduced me to the pirated video games and the Commodore and all that stuff, he actually went on. He's here in Austin still. And he actually owns and runs a very successful real estate firm. So a real estate agent and a business owner, which I think is interesting. The friend who I programmed this game with, years later when I went to Bungie, I got hired at Bungie, which I'll get to in a little bit. I actually got him an interview there. He got hired, he came to Bungie, and while I was leading up all the multiplayer online stuff on Halo, he ended up being the engineering lead on Halo 2, Halo 3, and so on. So just some interesting tidbits. So again, we'll fast forward through high school. This was that transition out of high school and into college was really important because I had to think about what do I want to be when I grow up. And the honest answer is I had no idea. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I'd gotten more into computer graphics. I taught myself graphic design. I actually got a job. By the way, I ended up going to the LBJ Science Academy. I think it's now called the Liberal Arts and Science Academy. Gordon, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have kids that go there, is that true? So I ended up, me and this one friend, everyone else went to Austin High. Me and this one friend, we actually ended up going to LBJ to the Science Academy. That's where I met my wife back there. So we've been together for quite some time. Which it's kind of odd to me in retrospect that I went to the Science Academy because I wasn't any good at, particularly good anyway, at science and math. I wasn't the worst at it. Really, what I had any true aptitude in was all liberal arts. So it's ironic that now it's all merged together because I barely scraped by in science and math, and and chemistry was a frickin' nightmare, and all of that. It was really hard, and I was around some incredibly smart people. Almost everyone that I was friends with, that I went to high school with, almost without exception, is now literally a scientist, gets put on a lab coat all day, or they're a college professor teaching math and science and physics and shit like that. So it was tough, and I had a very difficult time competing, just to be honest with you guys. So Where I didn't have a difficult time competing was anything that wasn't science and math. I was, without trying, I was an excellent writer. I could draw better than anybody. I had all these things going for me that nobody really gave a shit about at the school. I taught myself graphic design. I spent, at the time, if you can imagine, $1,500 out of my own pocket to buy a 3D program on the Mac called Stratus Studio Pro. Back then, that's probably $2,500 today, something like that. This was in high school, right? So, I did all these things, and then I got out. I was looking at colleges. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I ended up going to UT. I think I got automatically accepted, and I was a bit of a slacker, so I actually didn't apply anywhere else, so I guess I'll go to UT. So as soon as I got to UT, I started looking around, and I thought, you know what? I want to be a 3D artist. I think I want to be a 3D modeler. That would be pretty cool. So I started looking around at UT, and that wasn't an option. There was no 3D modeler. In fact, in all of UT at that time, they offered one, this was in 93, 94, there was one 3D graphics class offered at the entire university. You had to be a fourth-year art major to take it. And that just wasn't going to work for me. I wanted something that would utilize all of my skills. I have a lot to offer. So, not math. I intentionally placed out of calculus, honestly, so that I never had to take a math class in college again. So I was done. So anyway, I hit upon this idea, which is, you know what? Why don't I become an advertising major? Advertising, I can do copywriting, I can do, this creative work, I can do 3D graphics for commercials and blah, 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 blah. I lasted one semester, and I hated it. I apologize if there's any advertising majors in the room, but it wasn't for me. And what it came down to for me was the notion that I had to sell something that I didn't personally believe in. I just hated it. I could not do that. There was no way I was going to do that. So I changed majors. I actually landed eventually something that, unless you guys have heard me tell these stories already, no one here will ever guess. Does anyone who doesn't already know the answer have any guess at this point what I might have landed in for a major? And graduated in, for that matter? Don't say it if you already know it. Anyone have any guesses?
Psychology.
I considered sociology, hated that. Keep going. Any other? I never even thought about business, honestly. Which is funny because my wife over there got a minor in business. I had no interest.
Fine arts?
No, not interested in art. I took some art classes, but no interest in art. Any other? Philosophy, no.
English?
English, no. These are all good guesses. I was so.
Anthropology.
Now, I really genuinely thought that I wanted to be an anthropologist, and I went down that route, and some of my most awesome classes were in anthropology, but I think the business person in me didn't really see much of a future in that. So that is a very good guess. All right, but you guys are getting warmer, so here's the answer. I ended up getting a degree from UT in photojournalism. So, photojournalism is an interesting hybrid of a lot of, I grew up in this hippie commune, a lot of social concerns, which, by the way, to this day, I haven't retained a lot of the hippie aspects. I was always a bit of an outlier, but I'm still a lifelong vegetarian to this day, so, I kept some of it. If anyone follows me on Twitter, you're probably sick of me griping about politics and other things. I still am very active in that stuff. And I thought I want to make a difference and I want to change the world, but also, honestly, I wanted to learn photography. And there's an interesting reason for that. I was aware that I was a really good artist, but I was only a really good artist technically. I could look at something, I could look at this, and I could draw it, and it looked like a photograph. I just had that natural innate ability, but all it would look like is a hand holding a bottle and look like a photograph. There wasn't anything compelling about it, and I was very self-aware about this. So I decided that at one point, I decided that my fundamental flaw was that I needed to learn visual composition skills. Somehow I made it through 3-4 years of art in high school and never learned any visual composition skills. So why not learn photography? So I did that. I learned photography, and it's really interesting. After about 2 years doing photography, I actually went back and I took a traditional art class. And it's the same thing. Here's a vase full of flowers or whatever, everybody draw it. And what I would have done in the past, you would have seen a piece of paper and here's the vase, and it would have been a perfect rendering, and it would have been really boring. Once I learned photography, I learned that your paper is your lens, right? And all of a sudden, my art skyrocketed. It went through the roof, and all of a sudden, what that did for me is it rekindled my interest in thinking, maybe I do want to be an artist. Maybe I do want to be a 3D modeler again. dusted off the old buggy piece of shit software. It was still buggy and crappy despite all their patches. And I started getting back into thinking about 3D art. I started dabbling in Illustrator and actually doing, I don't know if any of you have ever seen, if you get like a Popular Mechanics type magazine and you see like a 3D cutaway of an engine, they probably do it in 3D today. Not back then. Back then, somebody would do that literally in Adobe Illustrator, and it was crazy. And I actually got pretty good, not to the level of Popular Mechanics good, but I actually got pretty good at doing a lot of that stuff. And I was working for a chemical engineer, put myself through college doing all this IT work and computer graphics for him, and I would do 3D cutaways of chemical separators and all this crazy shit. So I got the bug again. So at one point, I needed to get an internship. Those are requirements. So I thought, all right, I'm going to go out. I'm going to get an internship at a graphic design firm. That'll be kind of cool. So I went to a graphic design firm. I actually basically just cold called them. I walked in the door. I didn't know how I heard about them. I told them I wanted an internship, and they gave me a paid internship. It was awesome. So they also put me in the mailroom. That was my desk. That wasn't so awesome. But they knew that I had this interest in making video games. So it turned out the owner of the graphic design firm, at one point, her husband decided to leave his job. I think it was a company called TechWorks, which was making RAM for the Mac back then. He decided to leave his job, and he was going to start up a video game company, again, focused on the Mac, porting games and bringing them to the Mac. So she knew I was interested in games. She introduced me to him. He was just a one-man show. He was working on his first game. It was this game called, it was a port to the Mac. It was a game called Mahjong Parlor. So I did the box art for it. I did the manual, right? You know, all the kind of graphic design-y type things. Here's an interesting little tidbit. There are not a lot of companies left these days that have been game companies operating in Austin longer than Certain Affinity now. However, that guy was Michael Rogers, who started Aspire, which is probably the longest running game company in Austin now. Started up back in 95 or 96 or something. So when he was starting up, I was right there kind of on the ground floor, and started doing more and more work with him, taught myself how to make websites, built his first website, started helping them test games, doing all this different stuff, and for then it really lit the bug. So it was a bit of a crisis for me because I was on this path of photojournalism. Do I want to be a photojournalist? Do I want to make video games? Which way do I want to go? And I realized, probably late in my junior year, I realized that it was a real fork in the road and I needed to make a decision. So I remember I was really torn. I actually went to the the head of the photojournalism department was a friend of mine. Got along really well. I went to him and I asked him advice. And I told him my dilemma and I talked it through and I laid out the options. And here's what he said to me. He said, "You have some real talent, you have some real ability. I think that no matter which direction you go in, I think that you'll be really successful. However, I'll tell you this, if you become a photojournalist, you will die poor and unhappy. Why don't you go make video games?" True story. Why don't you go make video games? So that pretty much sealed the deal for me. Seemed like good advice.
And you thought I was dark, wow.
That's the point in my life, right? So anyway, that sealed the deal for me. So I was really committed. So that was junior year. I had one more year of college to go. Fine, I'll finish it out, but I want to make video games. I started talking to Michael. He had brought on Ted, if anyone knows them since then. At that point in time, it was a two-man show instead of a one-man show. I was, their hourly employee. I started talking to them, and it became clear to me that they really were very set on this path of we're a porting company. We port existing games to the Mac. We're not a developer. That didn't really interest me. I actually made a proposal to them because I was testing games for them. I remember after I tested a game, me and my same buddy, who was now my college roommate, along with 4 others, the same programming buddy, we were testing a game, if anyone remembers an old game called Shattered Steel, an old mech game. We had tested that for them, and this light bulb went off, and going back to the business stuff for a moment, I remember thinking, wait, okay, there's a path to video game development here, and I made a proposal to them. I was like, all right, I'm going to start a company, and this company is going to test video games, and we're going to use the profits of that testing to fund our own video game on the side. And I thought it was genius, and we made that proposal to them, and they weren't interested. They didn't want it. So that was kind of that. So I was going into my final summer before I graduated. I had a little bit of money saved up. I'd actually, completely randomly, I got a scholarship through the photojournalism through the Dallas Morning News, which is kind of ironic since I was already decided I wasn't going to be a photojournalist. But out of nowhere, I got a scholarship. I had some extra money. So we were looking at getting summer jobs. And I was like, hold on a second. We don't need to get summer jobs. I can pay us minimum wage for the whole summer. Me and my buddy, who's the programmer, we programmed the little Flappy Bird, Poopy Bird, whatever game in middle school. You know what? Let's start a game company. And I will pay us minimum wage over the course of the summer to make a game. So that's what we tried to do. I say tried. So we got, we started planning it out, and we started thinking about this game. We started designing the game, writing out all the system specs, the designs, you name it, everything. And what we were designing, this was in mid-90s, and Gordon may have some commentary, I'm curious about this. What we were designing was inspired by a game that was on the Mac from Ambrosia, called Escape Velocity. Anyone here know Escape Velocity? No? All right, so Escape Velocity was essentially a space sim think of it as an open universe. You're basically a trader, you're a pirate, you're whatever the hell you want to be. You're flying around the universe, this little top-down game in your spaceship. You can land on, orbitals, all this stuff. We had this idea to take a game like that, take that as our foundation. We were going to do two things to change it. First of all, we wanted a really awesome real-time combat model. So real-time combat, something really intense, something action-packed. Second of all, we wanted to make it so that when you played this game and you happened to be connected to the internet, which, don't get me wrong, there's no happen to be connected to the internet back then. This is in the age of probably 2400 baud modems. But we had this idea that in the future, more people will happen to be connected to the internet. And when they're playing this game, we want them, they think they're playing alone. We actually want them to randomly run into other real people and realize that they're all playing together in this giant shared space. So there's nothing like it at the time, not that I was aware of. Gordon, there might have been not on the Mac, but I was very insulated. That all I knew was on the Mac, and there was nothing like it. So we would have, had we actually succeeded, been very, very cutting edge, certainly on the Mac, in terms of really making the first MMO, I believe. All right, pause for a second. Am I totally off base, Gordon?
Yeah, way off.
Yeah. All right. We'll let Gordon clarify later, but that's actually always been my view on the Mac, at least. But the honest answer, I had no exposure. I never played a PC game. I never touched a PC until I got a job at Bungie, which was the premier Mac game company. I didn't even know how to use one, so very, very insulated. But we tried to make this game. We spent the summer trying to make it, and we sucked. I fought all summer with this 3D program that was buggy as shit, and just 24 hours to do a rendering of a simple model. At 23 hours, it would always crash. You can imagine the frustration all summer long. He was a bit of a perfectionist, and he spent all summer long writing the audio code for our game. So we had a great audio system, and we had a little shell UI, and that was it. So summer was over, and we really didn't have anything to show for it, so now I was in a bad spot. I wanted to get into video games. I hadn't even managed to put together any particularly compelling portfolio materials over the summer. So I started looking around thinking, all right, I gotta get serious, I gotta get a job. Who's here? This was early days of the internet. There was no go on the internet and search and see, here's all the game dev map or anything like that. I knew about 4 companies in Austin. One of them was Origin, one of them was Iguana, which later became Acclaim. One of them was this 2 guys in a basement who I randomly discovered and chatted with that I don't know what happened to them, but they're a company called Murder of Crows, I think. Does that sound familiar? Aspire, I guess maybe is the 4th. Yeah. Right, there was a 5th. There was one more, which was, there was an Origin spin-off called Digital Anvil, which had just started up. So once I found out about Origin, of course I wanted to go work at Origin. They made Ultima. They made this amazing game. So I did everything I could. One of my professors had a contact. I submitted my resume. I tried to get connections. I did everything I could. Complete radio silence. I never got a response from anybody. It's just complete dead end. So I did the same thing with Iguana at the time. In fact, I had a friend of my wife's who was dating an artist who worked at Iguana. A guy who has since gone on, and some of you might know him, I think his name is David Levy. a very, very, very awesome concept artist. He met with me, he talked with me, he was super friendly, and that was it. Nothing ever happened. I never managed to get an interview, get my foot in the door, nothing. Total dead end. So at that point, the only one that I knew left, I was talking to these Murder Crow guys, but it's 2 programmers, they had no need for me. They're super friendly, they were the only ones that were friendly. So at this point, all that I had left in Austin that I knew about, and maybe that's all it was, I don't know, was Digital Anvil. So this spin-off from Origin, that sounds kind of cool, but I was sick of, you know, the black hole. I send an email, I frickin' mailed them my resume and my portfolio. I did everything I could think of. I had introductions. Nobody would ever respond to anything. So I was like, all right, you know what I'm going to do? They were actually downtown. I found out that they were downtown. So, all right, I'm going to go there and I'm going to hand them my resume in person. So, all right, so I got up my nerve. I went there, walked in the door, got stopped by the receptionist. You know, what do you want? Look, blah, 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 looking for a job. Here's my resume. Oh my God, she chewed my ass out. She was so mean. I don't know who she was. I have a number of guys who work for me today who were actually working at Digital Anvil at that time. And whenever I tell them that story, they all laugh. They're like, oh yeah, that was so-and-so. So that sucked. It was pretty demoralizing. So I always try and be nice to kids who do that, even though it's a little awkward. I try and be polite and supportive, because I remember that. So, all right. So what are you going to do? What do you do? Even in the very, very early nascent days of the internet, start looking around on the internet. Now, I was aware of Bungie, and Bungie, in fact, was, outside of Origin, Bungie was my all-time favorite game. They're a dominant game company on the Mac, and when I wasn't actually doing real things, or playing basketball or some shit in college, I was basically playing Marathon continuously. I had a bunch of roommates, and we permanently networked our apartment with coaxial cable and Terminators, and if anyone remembers those days. And we played the shit out of Marathon. First FPS I ever played, and Marathon 2, Marathon Infinity, and absolutely loved it, and just played it nonstop. A little Warcraft 2 here and there, but mostly Marathon. So I was very aware of Bungie. In fact, I actually played Bungie's very first game all the way back in high school, so very aware of them. I went to their website a few times, and they had the worst website. It was the ugliest piece of shit. So it was so bad, I just stopped going there. But I got desperate. So one day, I went back to the Bungie website because I was desperate, and they had a job posting that the job title was Graphic Designer / Webmaster. And I read through the job description. I'm like, yeah, I've done some graphic design. And Webmaster, well, at that point in time, I had made 2 websites. One was my own little portfolio site just to learn how to make websites. The other one was Aspire's website. These are early days of the internet. I thought that pretty much qualifies me to be a webmaster. So sure, let's apply, send off an email. At this point, you guys can imagine, I certainly was not expecting to get a response, right, from this company that I absolutely idolized. So a couple of days pass. Luckily, there were no cell phones back then, but the phone rings. I pick it up. I was fortunate that none of my roommates picked it up because things might have ended differently. I pick up the phone and I get this call. It says, hey, is Max there? I'm like, yeah, this is Max. Hey Max, this is Alex from Bungie. Like, Alex Ropian, like the co-founder of Bungie, Alex? Yeah, that Alex. Shit, trying to get all my roommates to shut up as they're like laughing and playing Marathon. Oh my God, you guys are killing me. So it's like, all right, so I talked to Alex. I chat with Alex for a little bit. I applied to our job. You got an interesting resume, blah, 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 blah. So we chatted for a little bit. And at one point in the conversation, Alex asks me, he said, so, I'm kind of curious, what do you think of the Bungie website? And my response, took a drink. Here's what I said, literally. I said, I'm going to be honest with you. It's terrible. It is so bad that I almost didn't apply for the job. Think about that for a second. That doesn't make any sense. Clearly they're hiring a webmaster because they need help with their website, but it was the truth, right? I didn't really tell the story entirely, which is I hate going to it, so I almost didn't see your job. So it came out as I almost didn't apply for the job, which was a little awkward, but it was exponentially more awkward when he said, oh really? Because I made it. You guys can imagine, at this point I'm like, hopes of getting a job, pretty much zero, right? So we go on. He's like, well, you think you can do better? yeah. So, all right, I'm gonna give you a test. Right? I want you to make us a new website. Oh yeah, all right, there's redemption. I might be able to pull this out of the fire, right? So, in your talk, he tells me, he had planned this because he's like, get a pen and paper, got it? He's like, all right, here's the requirements. And he had like 9 requirements he had. He wanted essentially flashy JavaScript rollovers, which I didn't know what JavaScript was. He wanted this, he wanted that. I took all my notes, and this was on a Friday afternoon, by the way. I took all the notes, and I was like, he's like, okay, when do you think you can have it to me? I'm like, I'll have it to you first thing Monday morning. So hung up the phone, and I basically, I know mostly if you remember this time, I basically pulled nonstop all-nighters, Friday night, Saturday night, most of Sunday night, taught myself JavaScript, learned how to make this awesome website. I actually made his whole website, did everything he wanted, sent him an email Monday morning, your website is ready, and then I crashed. So, but it worked. He liked the website. He, wrote back to me, I like it, I want to fly you out here for an interview. So now we're on to something. So that was an interesting time. They were up in Chicago at the time. My sole experience with Chicago, I had been there for one day for a friend's graduation. Actually, the English professor that I mentioned earlier had been there for his graduation. I didn't really remember it very well because I had drank a little too much, and I got really sick from all the alcohol too. Chicago was just a blur. But flew me up to Chicago, they picked me up, came in, I had my interview, and the interview was interesting because I did something really interesting. They asked me in the interview, so, what do you want to do long term? My answer, I did not hesitate. Keep in mind I was interviewing for this graphic designer / webmaster job. I want to be a game designer. Usually that's not the recommended way to handle an interview, to basically say I don't really want to do the thing I'm interviewing for, I want to do something totally different. But this was the Wild West, I guess, back then. They didn't seem to mind. They hired me anyway. So later that day, he pulled me into his office. Got through the whole interview, had lunch. The Bungie was 12, 13 people at that time, the entire company. We all sat on the floor eating what they thought was amazing food, which was big burritos from a place called La Cocina. I'm from Texas, it was shit. So I actually felt ill from it. But anyway, he pulled me in his office, I'm feeling a little queasy. He starts talking, I want to make you an offer. Hell yeah, I made it, this is awesome. So I had in my head though, I had in my head, all right, if I get an offer, it's very optimistic of me, I will negotiate the offer. Probably blame my wife for that, she's a negotiator. So I'd gone there with this mentality. If I get an offer, I will absolutely, I must negotiate it. So he says, all right, so basically, blah, 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 I'm gonna make you an offer and I'm gonna pay you $25,000. So I think I did the math the other day. I was thinking about $25,000 is like $38,000 or $39,000 in today's dollars. So not bad for a kid right out of college, starting salary, right? And I remember thinking that in my head. I'm like, holy shit, that's a lot of money. Okay, I should just take it. No, wait. You said you'd negotiate. Oh shit, what do you do? So I was not a very skilled business person or negotiator at that point in time. So I started hemming and hawing and, I don't know, I'm going to have to do this, it's going to be expensive, blah, 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 blah. He interrupted me. He said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you $500 to pack your car, drive all your stuff up here. Deal. I checked the box. Woohoo! I negotiated. Awesome. So of course he's like, we were crunching then. We were getting close, or they were getting close to shipping a game which I also love. One of my all-time favorite games, Myth: The Fallen Lords. Their real-time strategy game. They needed help. They had to finish the box art. Had to do all this stuff. And he's like, so when can you start? I don't know. When do you need me? He's like, how about next week? Sure, I'll be here. So I went back. I told everyone, hey everybody, I'm moving to Chicago and I gotta leave in a few days and packing up my car. So moved up to Chicago, I drove there, and you couldn't find a place on the internet at that point in time. So literally, I actually slept on a cot at Bungie headquarters in the very, very rough neighborhood for I think about 3 weeks before I found an apartment. But it was okay because we had a lot of work to do. It was awesome. I was living the dream and I loved it. So best time of my life. So, all right. So at this point, I've got my foot in the door. Remember my earlier story? How did I actually make it into development, right? So I got my foot in the door. As you all can see, I'm really completely and utterly unqualified to be a game developer. at this point in time, or an artist or anything else for that matter. I can do graphic design. I can make websites. The day that I get there, he says, your first project, take that website that you made for me as your test, make that into our website. You can actually go back on Wayback Machine, and you can see I think, last time I checked, you can see that website that I made, so kind of cool. So, all right, so I'm in there, I'm in the mix, I'm part of the publishing team. Bungie was self-published at that time. Today, self-published is much easier. Back then, self-published, there was only retail. Self-published meant you had to go meet with Walmart and convince them to give you shelf space. So it was a very, very ballsy thing to do. I got involved beyond the publishing. I was also a mega fan of the Myth the Fallen Lords. Bungie had launched their own online service called BungieNet. It was kind of modeled after BattleNet for their own games, and I basically played the game every single night. I was addicted. It's my first online game experience, and I more or less became the community manager on the side for it, because it's not like we had a community manager. I organized volunteers to police it and all this crap, but so I was starting to get a little bit of relevant experience that I would use later. Certainly not in direct game design experience. There was this fascinating point where I look back today and I still think, this would have been a really interesting turning point. At one point, Alex Charopian, who was one of the co-founders, there are two co-founders, Alex and Jason Jones. Jason did all development, Alex did all of the business, publishing, all of that. So I was working for Alex. At one point, Alex had to go off to the West Coast to try and save our West Coast studio that they'd opened up and the Oni project out there and all this stuff. And he left me in charge. This was 2 years in, maybe. So I was in charge of marketing, publishing, and all that stuff, or at least all the marketing type aspects of it. At the same time, we were working on Myth 2, a sequel, and we were having some really serious issues with the project lead. I knew this because I had become best buddies with Alex. I had also incidentally become best buddies separately with Jason, who was the other co-founder, so I knew all about their trials and tribulations. At one point, Jason comes to me, go into Alex's office, sit down on the couch. He's like, hey, we're gonna have to let the project lead go. That was hard because the project lead was also my friend. The three of them were my sole social circle. So it's kind of awkward, but I said, we're gonna let the project lead go, and I'd like you to be the project lead for Myth 2. And I said, oh shit, what do I do? And I told him, and I was like, I was really nervous. And to be honest with you guys, I don't think, I hemmed and hawed. I didn't tell him the real reason. I told him, well, I don't know, I made all these commitments to Alex to run the marketing, and I can't let Alex down, and blah, 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 blah. You notice a trend here of not being the best negotiator, explaining my position. But, so I declined to do it. But the real reason is I was scared to do it. I knew, I was self-aware enough to know that I was utterly unqualified for that position. And the chances of having the respect of the team, which was a team in crisis, were zero, right? And I didn't want to do it. I don't know if that was the right call. Certainly an interesting fork in the road in my career. So as much as I was saying, I want to be a developer, I want to be a developer, I want to be a developer, when that opportunity came my way, I actually was like, no, actually I think I'll stay over here, the marketing publishing side. So I kept saying, though, over the years, I want to be a designer. So remember I said to you guys, it took 5 years. So meanwhile, we work on this game called Halo. I'm dabbling a little bit. I did the first HUD for them. Honestly, I was pretty terrible at it. I think they threw out most of what I did and redid it. So I really had very little to do with Halo development. I mean, I took the very first screenshot ever for Halo, which was awesome because I was a photographer. Take some damn good screenshots. I really was not equipped to be a game developer, but I kept saying I want to be a designer, I want to be a designer. Fast forward, we got acquired by Microsoft. We go out there, we're working on Halo, and I actually start up the Bungie community team, trying to preserve the brand and run the online games that we're operating, community interactions, all this different stuff. And I do that for 2 years. So I do that through Halo shipping. Now I do dabble a little bit more. I had done all the user interface for Myth 2. I was better at that, the full screen UI than the HUD. And then I ended up doing all the user interface for Halo 1. But I say I do all the user interface. I hired a graphic designer, a guy who was a pretty good UI artist, and I just kind of did wireframes in Illustrator and told him what to do. It was probably 10, maybe 20% of my time during Halo development, and that's all I had to do with Halo. After we finished Halo 1, Now things get interesting. So I don't know if people are aware, I know this has come out in public a couple times, that the multiplayer game that the team had planned for Halo 1 never got implemented. They had a very, very different vision for what multiplayer would be than what we actually implemented. So what we implemented was a mad dash scramble to just throw something together. A lot of it just fell back on shit that worked back in the marathon days, which was great because it worked. And that's what we shipped for multiplayer. So when we started on Halo 2, the core team, the people who had been on Halo 1, they were very, very unhappy. Multiplayer was not what we wanted it to be, or not what they wanted it to be. Now, keep in mind, I was on the community side, I was engaging with the community, and I was seeing this thing in the LAN party setting go just gangbusters, right? I was aware, like, holy shit, like we've caught lightning in a bottle here. Meanwhile, I wasn't actually on Halo 2 for the first 6 months, and the plan that the development team had was they're going to basically scrap all Halo 1 style multiplayer, and they were going to go to this big, epic, turn-based asymmetric thing they called Warfare. And I was really vocal to Alex and Jason. I said, that's a terrible idea, right? Keep in mind, broadband penetration was really, really low back then. Not everyone had internet access. I'm like, you can't leave everyone behind. There's all these people that are loving our game and, in a LAN party setting. You can't abandon them. You can't go online only. You can't give them nothing, right? And you can't, and also, I come from this school, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I was like, yeah, it's not the dream that these guys had, but it works and it's fun, and there's so much low-hanging fruit, easy ways to enhance it. So I was very vocal, and I would let them know, and I'd let everyone know that I thought they were making a catastrophic error. Eventually, Alex and Jason came to me and they said, you know what, we think you're right. We think this is a mistake. We can't abandon, people that don't have online access. So we're going to keep doing the big, crazy multiplayer, but we want you to figure out what we're going to do for multiplayer for the small, for the little LAN party, for people who are just, 2 machines on a network or 1 machine split screen. They called it the party game. You do the party game, figure that out. We'll give you 1 environment artist. And I had a UI programmer, I was still doing all the UI. And that was it, go. So it was a little side thing. So I started doing that. I was actually still running our community team, started designing stuff. Now, with a really, really small team like that, I knew, okay, there's really no room for error here. It's not like we're going to do a bunch of stuff and throw it out and redo it. I figured, all right, we got to get it right the first time. I was just making it up as I go. So I said, you know what? We're going to start by designing everything on paper. Total novelty. Nothing at Bungie had ever been designed on paper before. But for me, I'm like, we're going to start. It's easy on paper. It's cheap. We're going to design it all virtually 2D. So we did that. We started doing that, started going through our designs. Here's some fun tidbits for you guys. The very first level that we actually designed, we had up and running. We had this playable in like a month. The very first level that we ever designed, we ever had playable, is a level called Lockout. I think a few of you know Lockout. It ended up, probably to this day, that level is ranked in the top 3 all-time Halo levels across the entire franchise. So that was fun. We were onto something. We had something fun. Another fun tidbit. I did not design Lockout. That was my environment artist. The first level that I ever designed, and truly this is in my career because I really hadn't done any level design, was another level that we shipped with Halo 2 called Midship, if anyone remembers Midship. So Midship went on to become the favorite map of the competitive MLG competitive crowd years and years later. I wasn't actually aware of that until years later, but apparently it's a thing. So kind of cool. So we got it right. We had some really fun content early on, and we were basically iterating. Meanwhile, 6 months passed doing that, and they had not even started on the big game, Warfare. We were probably 2 years, maybe 18 months, 2 years out from shipping, and they had not even started on the big game. So one day, Alex had since left. He kind of wrote out his requirements. He didn't want to be at Microsoft. He got out of there. So I was working directly for Jason. So one day, Jason comes to me, and he says, all right, the Warfare, he had left the project and come back to save it, because single player was also a giant mess. So he came back to save it. We're making cuts. We're doing this. We're doing that. We're cutting Warfare. That means you and your 1 little environment artist, what you guys are doing is going to be the multiplayer for the entire game. I thought about it a little bit. I said, I'm gonna need one more artist. So I did. I hired actually a guy who's now one of the most senior environment art leads at Bungie today. I hired him, and we cranked it out. Now in parallel, I'm wrapping this up pretty quick, but in parallel, Jason had grabbed me at one point, and he had grabbed a guy named Chris Butcher, who was the networking engineering lead, who was doing all this. Eventually did all this fancy stuff. He had grabbed the two of us. And he said, "Hey, so I'm about to go, and we're gonna have our first ever meeting with this Xbox Live team." They had launched Live. I don't know if any of you remember Live in its green version, the very, very first, very, very primitive version. They had launched that, and they wanted to talk with us. And Halo's the biggest game Microsoft's got coming out, and they want to know what we need, what kind of features we need from Xbox Live. So Jason's like, "All right, I'm going to meet with these guys, Max, Butcher. I want you guys to come along, but you're not allowed to talk." Or whatever, sure. So we go along, we sit there, we listen to Jason. He's completely making this stuff up, right? He has an idea, but he's putting out fires. He hasn't really thought about this. He's making this up. Meanwhile, I had been working on the UI design for the game for a long time, thinking about the online experience, thinking about all these things. So we went to that meeting. We came out of the meeting. A day later, Butcher and I pulled Jason aside and we said, "Hey Jason, you don't need to come to those live team meetings anymore. We got this." He's like, "Really? You sure?" Well, yeah, don't worry about it. We got this. And then I basically became in addition to designing all the multiplayer and the everything lead for multiplayer, I became the online lead also for Halo 2. I ended up, designing the ranking system, the matchmaking system, the party system was my baby. All these innovations, drove all kinds of innovation in Xbox Live, wrote most of the first version specs for, one of my grand ideas was, it sucks to have to exit your game to see whether your friends are online, so why don't we have our friends list accessible at all times? We had to build it. We had to build all the UI for that. The Y menu, if anyone remembers pressing the Y button to see your friends, that was all stuff that I dreamed up. So, all of that entire online experience. Meanwhile, I didn't have a designer, I was the designer. I had 2 environment artists, I had some UI guys, I had some part-time programmers, and then I had some real programmer support working with the Xbox Live team to support, host migration and all these other really complex features that I was on the hook to write all of the specs for, because the engineers would not do anything unless they had specs. So I spent on Halo 2 and then subsequently on Halo 3, I spent the next 5 years of my career basically doing all of that, writing all of the specs, driving the systems, meeting with the Xbox Live team to set expectations and drive features, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a whole nother story for another day, which I know there's some interest in the development of Halo Online, but I feel like I've blasted through this, but and I'm getting really hot. But this is that's my journey into game development. Perhaps unusual, I don't know. Certainly unusual in my experience. So let's open it up for questions.
Why don't we take a
Take a break first?
Take a break first.
Yeah, sure.
Would you let the heat?
Yes, that'd be good. Oh, I'm not the only one?
Yeah.
All right, we'll take a break. Think of some good questions.
And come back in
5 minutes.
We'll start a Q&A.
All right.
I think they remade that map like at least 3 or 4 times.
But I hear it wasn't as good.
Well, because they made it in Halo 5, but they opened it up, right?
Yeah, I know.
Because they
I went
do
up
the
there.
sprint and all that
I went
stuff.
up there to visit them when they were working on that, and it was their big surprise for me. They showed me while it was still in development, and they thought they were all waiting, and I had to pretend like I was happy. And really, I was like, they totally changed the scale on this. I hate
It was really funny because the last time we came, we were talking about it. Like, wow, you guys did. So Max came up and grabbed the whole, 6-pack. And on the ride home, it's sitting next to me in the back seat. And I was like, Max, did you know that you grabbed none? I saw you say that. Yes. And Max out was like a and yeah, I mixed them in with the sort of original meat and I just sat there and I was watching waiting for the fireworks.
Well, again, it's made for people to participate in drinking with honey and blender.
Exactly. Yeah, one of the guys, the first person I ever talked off. So this isn't real. He's like a British dude. It was super fun. So how's it?
I've committed myself to a lot more stuff. This is my fulfillment. I don't have kids. I'm stuff like this.
It's all that matters. Are you trying to tell me something?
No, they pushed that in the book. This side, that's like my
Yeah, that's why I don't see
We're talking mostly about himself. I think he has lots to say.
pretty clean.
I was worried about that.
You gotta come in and try to fix these.
It looks like an old pneumatic thermostat. They're also.
Yeah, I've noticed on
Yeah, we had some of these down in South Park. It could be 80 degrees and things would trip, but the pneumatic system actually floods those. Well, that was the problem we had. It was too much or not enough. Nothing in between. Oh, I hear. Oh, I thought for a second I heard the air that the weather it's probably the weather outside. When I get to the faint rumble.
Thanks for coming out. I did, before you got here, I got everyone who was looking for a job at the yeah, I was like, sorry about coming in
No kidding. Texting me like a step back. He wants to do his own thing. It's that continuity that we accomplished with the game. Just brainstorming in January. They rolled it that studio 5 years ago. A lot of stuff happened. Everybody's wondering if there's their own studio or so it's kind of a less now. It became less and less about being more about like the good news is that it's not going to alright, so we're looking at what find the shit out of this. No, it's just awesome game dev. That's really all people are about. Alright, so we have 15 minutes. We started doing same one. Oh yeah. One of my questions why not? I'm still not talking to
He's always been about
There's like not a lot of
right now,
We'll get back to talking to Max in just a sec. And thank you, Capital Factory, for turning the AC back on. Yes, it wasn't your imagination. It actually was very hot in here. Sorry about that. And I'm the one wearing a blazer, so think about how I feel. All right. Well. So thank you for talking to us, Max. As I was telling Mojay just a minute ago, game developers as a typical tribe don't typically get to talk about themselves as human beings much. So thank you for reminding us to tell your life story. I do have one question for you, just to start off. Do you ever think about what things would have been like if you'd stayed in Seattle working for Bungie or Microsoft?
Well, I don't really have to think about it because I know. I mean, I know exactly what Bungie's doing. I still got friends there. I know exactly what it would be like. Do I have regrets? No regrets. Never look back. So before we open it up to Q&A, sorry, I'm wolfing down some pizza here. Before we open it up to Q&A, I was getting really hot, and my wife was also doing this, giving me the sign. So I skipped over one fun tidbit that I was just chatting with Gordon about, and he reminded me. I'm like, all right, I got to at least elaborate my story a little bit with this one additional piece of data. So
sit down.
yeah, you definitely have to sit down for this. So you guys remember earlier I was saying that I never actually used a PC, a Windows, or it wasn't even Windows back then, but I never used a PC. No, I've never even seen one. I never touched one. I just heard it was this dark, evil thing that I'd heard about as a Mac user. And first time, so I went to work at the premier Mac game company, and lo and behold, they're going multi-platform. Myth is going to be multi-platform. So we were, shortly after I started, probably on the order of weeks, we were done with the Mac version of Myth the Fallen Lords, and we were right in the home stretch, they were, because I was brand new, they were right in the home stretch on the Windows version, the PC version, and there was no such thing as in-house testing. There was no such thing as QA back then. The way that we tested our games was everybody needs to play the game, right? So, and everyone needs to play the PC build. So of course, I was doing graphic design stuff, so I was on a Mac. So I would go over and I would play the game on our sales guy. He had a PC. I'd go play on the PC. Fine, no big deal. That was my first time ever using a PC. So we're going along. Seems like everything's good. We think we got our gold master, right? Everybody's good. Everyone's playing one more time. Everyone one more round of playing. All of a sudden, my machine freezes. Like, I got a bug, right? So I go, there were only 3 programmers at Bungie at that time. So one of the guys comes over, looks at it. What were you doing? He asks the questions, whatever, try and replicate it. I don't really know. It was a big battle. It was a really intense moment, so it must have had something to do with too many units on screen, or who knows, whatever, right? So, all right, keep going. Now everyone's panicking, like this critical showstopper bug. Oh shit. Keep going. Everyone gack on the build, playing. Nobody gets any problem. I don't have any problems that day. I'm playing the game that night, because remember, I was also living at Bungie. And it's also my all-time favorite game. So I'm playing the game that night. Nobody's there. Doing it all again. Get to this big battle. It gets really intense. The whole thing hard locks again. Oh shit, oh shit. So the next morning I have to tell them, hey, I leave it in that state in case there's nothing that can be done. So, oh crap, now everyone's getting really nervous. This basic cycle goes on for 3 or 4 days. And the thing that's really messed up about it is that other people play on this machine and it doesn't happen. Other people play on other machines and it doesn't happen. People play the same level and it doesn't happen. People do the same battle. Everything I can think of to describe my repro steps, and it's never the same level, it's never the same battle. But the one clue, it always happens when there's a really big battle. So you can imagine we have our date for our gold master, our discs are going to be printed, we need to wrap this thing up. There's this critical showstopper bug. At one point, Jason Jones, who's now the co-founder of Bungie, pretty much to this point, he utterly ignored me. He comes up, he asks me questions, I'm really nervous, I don't know what's going on. So, another day passes, this is crisis, this is really bad. And I have the magic touch, I am the only one who can find this bug. So, I'm there late at night again, I'm the only one there, I'm sitting there, everything freezes, and a light bulb goes off. And I'm like, oh my God, I am the biggest idiot in the universe. So, all night I have to think about how am I going to tell these guys what the bug is, what's going on, because I'm going to look like an idiot. So, the next day they come in, I get Jason, the other programmers come. There's only 13 people at the company, so everyone's basically standing around me as I show them the repro steps for this bug. Now, going back for a moment, remember I said I never used a PC machine before. I never used a Windows machine. A Mac at that time, and I think this is still the case, has just that big old 1-button mouse. I'd never used a 2-button mouse before. There were no scroll wheels or anything then, it was just 2 buttons. I'd actually never used a 2-button mouse. So, what would happen, what I discovered late at night, much to my embarrassment, is when things would get really stressful, when I would get really nervous, when it would get really frantic, I would revert to my old habits and I would press the mouse button right in the middle like I used to do on the Mac. All you had to do is double click 2 mouse buttons at the same time and it would completely freeze the game. That was the bug. Can you imagine? I felt like the biggest idiot. But that was a really transformative experience because as much as I felt like an idiot, I also found a critical bug that we've been quite embarrassed to ship with. So that later that afternoon, Jason Jones, my idol, the game designer behind all the games I love, comes up to me. He says, he's got his buddy, our other programmer, hey, you want to go out to lunch with us? Sure. So I go out to lunch, and you guys remember earlier, I said I was really close, good friends with Jason and Alex, the 2 co-founders. We became good friends after that, even though I was this just dumb, mouse-clicking kid in marketing. We became good friends. I went out to lunch with them, and guess what they talked about? D&D the whole time. So I was like, man, I've made it. This game dev thing is awesome. So anyway, sorry, a little bit of color to the story. So, questions? Should we?
Yeah.
Are you taking them? Am I?
Wait, just raise your hand and ask the question.
What do you got? All right.
Because of your own kind of unconventional path to get into where you're at today, does that translate into how you identify an opportunity within, or talent within your own company, or solicit ideas and that sort of thing?
I think that it does. I know I'm very explicitly always trying to be open to people that come through that may not fit the mold, right? And I always try and give people the benefit of the doubt and look for the diamond in the rough would be the best way to describe it. I've always been that way, and I try and guide my company to do the same. We have what we call, and I've had this for 10 years now, we have what we call, there's our jobs that are open, officially posted, blah, blah, blah. Then we have what we call an opportunistic hire. Opportunistic hire goes like this. Anybody who comes along, who applies to our company, or who we encounter, who we think is awesome, then we must have them. I'm open to hiring, right? Just prove to me that you're awesome and that we'd be better off with you than without you. And there's some practical limits on that, of course, but I've always had that philosophy. I've always looked for the diamond in the rough. Caveat to that, I found a lot of chunks of coal that I thought were diamonds. It doesn't always work out, unfortunately. Haven't found a few diamonds, so I'm not trying to be negative about it, but yeah, I've taken more chances than I think other people would in that respect. Sometimes it's worked out, and sometimes it's been a dud. So, okay, other questions?
So, important question, because it came up several times in your presentation.
Why do you cuss so much?
Nope. Do you still play D&D?
So that same group of friends that combined group, we started going to backpacking every summer between 7th and 8th grade, and we actually continued. Most of us were roommates all through college. I've been almost every summer without exception since middle school. I've gone on a big extended backpacking trip. Back then, when we're kids, we would go for like 5 weeks, and we pretty much would play tennis, and play D&D constantly. But we actually kept up the tradition. So every once in a while, rarely, I will play D&D. I did it for one of that group, actually the programmer that I was talking about. I was like his groomsman, me and one other guy, best man, whatever, for his wedding. And I asked him what he wanted to do for his bachelor party. He said, I want to go backpacking and play D&D. So what are you going to do? So that was probably the last time I ran any D&D session. I also played D&D with some guys from Bungie, including Jason back when we were working at Bungie, which was fascinating to see Jason, who's this amazing game designer, to see how he designs and runs a dungeon for D&D. It was really interesting. Well, I'll tell you guys a secret. I hated it. Did not like it at all. He's a really good designer. He should be doing multiplayer games though, not this story narrative-based stuff. You guys know that from Destiny though. All right, let's keep going. Yeah.
As a business owner and successful one, what do you think is the biggest challenges facing Austin game dev businesses, and what do you think we can do to work together to help solve that, make it better?
So that's a good question. I've been, a few people here have heard me. I've been kind of railing about this for a little while. You look familiar, so you might have been at a session that I was railing about this at. I am predicting I am not being pessimistic here. I genuinely am predicting a real crisis for game companies in Austin that's on the way, that we're in the midst of. And it comes about for two reasons. Austin is such a hot town that costs, especially for real estate, costs are skyrocketing. The effect of that is more expensive to do business, lower margins, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what it really means is it actually drives a lot of companies out of Austin or discourages companies from Austin. I think there's a trend we're going to see with more and more companies moving into the suburbs, surrounding communities, Cedar Parks, and Pflugervilles and those sorts of things. It's really challenging to be a game developer in Austin proper, at least, and it's only going to get more challenging. Costs are going to get more expensive. There's some real strategic, long-term, valid reasons why we decided to buy our own building and actually put down roots, but in a way that ultimately will control those costs. The second one, and this one is, I think, actually more significant. As all these big companies come in, big tech companies, big name companies, Googles and Facebooks and Amazons and all these different companies, Indeeds and all these companies, the compensation and the benefits and all these different things that they can offer to tech workers, the game industry simply cannot compete with that. So the game industry has to find other ways to be competitive, or you'll lose that battle. And the costs of talent, especially technical talent, are just skyrocketing. We're already starting to see some of that. We have a couple of people even at CA that we lost to the tech industry. I love games. I want to make games, but a not game tech company is offering me twice as much money as you guys can pay me. It's a real pending crisis, and it's only exacerbated by this. The grant program in the state of Texas has been really, for those that use it, including CA, has been really essential for years and years to help control some of that. That's caught up in politics right now. It's potentially going away. Very, very dangerous, and it's going to make it very difficult in Austin.
Thanks.
Now we're serious. All right. All right. Back here, and then we'll get to you. Go ahead.
So I know Bungie had released some of its mod tools, like I think it was Hammer and Anvil with Marathon Infinity,
Yep.
and then there was the mod tool for Myth 2. And I'm wondering, since you were looking at things from the sort of community side and everything, did you see like a lot of potential in that mod community back then with those, and did that shape things that you did later on?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was, because I wasn't really, most of the time I wasn't in development, I wasn't always instrumental in it, so a lot of times people would come to me and ask my opinion, and my opinion was always, hell yeah, we should release mod tools, we should be promoting this community content creation. The first time where I really had anything to do with that was Halo 3, where I actually I didn't drive the feature design because Halo 3 actually I had a designer, which I didn't have on Halo 2, which designed, but I actually really promoted the map editor for Halo 3 and tried to do our best to create content sharing tools and those sorts of things, and somewhat flubbed it in terms of creating an ecosystem, but certainly created some very powerful tools. Okay.
I'd like to know about more of the transition between when you're an employee to when you're trying to do your own startup, especially as far as like money's concerned and how you manage that.
Yeah. So we're about halfway through Halo 3 when I decided that I was going to come back to Austin. Moved back to Austin, and I actually kept working for Bungie remotely because there was a whole bunch of stuff that there just wasn't anyone else that could do. All this really technical, really intricate, working with a live team and matchmaking and rankings, and mostly Xbox Live stuff. I had gotten the team from a content standpoint to a very good spot where we'd done all our pre-pro on our levels and game modes and all that stuff, and we were not in the home stretch, but we were in production. And I really focused on this other complex stuff. At the same time, I was thinking about starting my own thing. I didn't really want to be a remote employee. The game industry in general, and Bungie especially, they're absolutely terrible at any kind of remote working. I'll give you guys an example. I was on this conference call once. I was down here in Austin. Very stressful day. I'm in the car. I'm on this conference call. It's me on one end. The other end is about a dozen programmers, all really senior guys, and a producer. And I'm basically walking them through all of my plans that they're going to have to implement and the revisions and all this stuff. So I'm sitting there talking to them, and the whole time, there's just this tap, 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 and all this, and I can't hear anything, and it's just driving me bonkers. At one point, I actually said, I had a genius idea, and I said to the guy who's Matt, is the producer, and I said, hey Matt, are you taking notes? He's like, yeah. I'm like, on a laptop, right? Yeah. Look under your laptop. He looked under it, there was the microphone for the speaker. It was terrible. It was really hard to work remotely. So, for that and some other reasons, I decided I want to strike off on my own. What I did is I'm very careful, cautious, try and plan everything. So what I did is, at the time, I basically worked it out so that they wanted a DLC multiplayer map pack for Halo 2. They couldn't do it internally, so I was like, hey, well, let me just hire some contractors down here, and while I'm doing all this other stuff, I'll get some contractors, and we'll crank out some maps for you guys. So we were doing that, and I was like, hey, so I kind of want to leave and start my own company. Why don't you let me take those contractors and that work, convert it to a contract with my own company, and That way you get what you want, I get what I want. And it was all above board, and they were actually okay with it because the alternative is I was gonna leave. Gordon remembers, I think I was talking to him, that's when I first met Gordon at that point in time, as I was trying to decide what to do. You know, the alternative was I was gonna leave and they weren't gonna get their map pack, it'd be kind of crappy. So, yeah, so they worked with me, we worked it all out, and I basically, I had to get, the way Microsoft worked, I had to get a formal permission to do what they called moonlighting, which is to say I couldn't actually negotiate a contract with Microsoft while I was an employee of Microsoft unless I got special permission. So there's a form, you go and you fill it out. So I filled out this form, and it's, you know, why, you know, what are you doing? So I'm leaving Microsoft, I'm starting my own game company, and I want to negotiate a deal, you know, blah, blah, blah. So that's what I put in my form, I submitted it. Few days, a week passed, nothing happened. I happened to know the games attorney, the guy who did all the attorneys, the attorney did all the games work for Microsoft. So I called him up. I was like, hey, did you get my request? He's like, yeah, this is really highly unusual. So I'm like, yeah, don't worry about it. It's all above board. Talk to these people. So he got past it. We got a contract negotiated. And then, funny enough, I was all ready to go. We had a contract already signed. It was on Christmas Day, 2006, and it was all ready to go. They sent it to me, or they were all ready to send it to me for signature, but they said, there's one hang up. You can't actually sign this contract unless you quit. So I emailed my resignation, and then I signed that contract, and I literally did not go a day without having a contract in place. So when I started Certain Affinity, I essentially had revenue from day one. I was trying to do some other games also and some other stuff. A game that eventually became Age of Booty, which we were prototyping ourselves. So I was spending more than I was making, but I also had some of my own money that I put in to fund it, basically royalties off of Halo that I'd earned. And I think at that point it cost me about $80K all told. And at one point, that was my prediction, $80K. It went up to about $110,000 at peak, and then I eventually paid that off. And that's all the money that I've ever put out of my own pocket into Certain Affinity. And then everything else, that's 10 years, 10 going on 11 years, we've turned a profit every single year, totally independent, never taken any investment from anyone. We've just worked hard and been profitable, been careful, been profitable. So,
and no layoffs.
And no layoffs, thank you. We've grown every year, thank you, Brad, and we've never laid anyone off. So we're definitely unusual in that respect, but if anyone thinks there's valuable lessons to be learned there, it's, I think it's interesting that despite my lack of interest in business, I feel like I turned out to be a pretty good business person. But someone asked me, I get these interviews a lot, someone asked me, like, what's your best book on business you've ever read? And what's your best book on management that you've ever read? And every time, the honest answer, I haven't. I've never read a book on business. I've never read a book on management and leadership. I read a lot of sci-fi and fantasy. Of that what you will. It's worked for me. It's not for everyone, my strange path. So, okay, maybe we'll do like one or two more questions. And all right, go ahead.
I got kind of a long question. Is that all right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, kind of keeping in touch with this transitioning topic. So, what are some of the larger challenges that you've had to deal with when dealing with requirements changes, both when you were working with Alex and Jason, as well as with Certain Affinity, working with ID Activision, and then when you're transitioning to your new IP, how are you planning on validating those ideas and changes and deliverables when there's no other company and it's just you and the customer?
What do you mean by requirements?
So, all right. So, when it comes to we're doing a multiplayer Mac pack, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they tell you this is kind of what we're looking for. You create the content, and then someone on the other side validates that work,
Mm-hmm.
and then that goes into the game, right? Mm-hmm. But when there's not that other person, you have your own IP that you're working on.
Sure.
Right? Now you have loyal customer base, you have a lot of fans, but there's not that other person. You don't have to go and talk to id Software. You don't need to talk to Activision. It's just you. This is your IP.
Sure.
So now you have become Alex and Jason in this sense,
Gotcha.
right? So
there's some of that we're still in that transition. We've done a few of our own original games over the years, and I would say honestly, I don't think we've managed that very well, and that's one of the reasons our original games haven't been as successful as I'd like, and we're trying to change that. So very, very conscientious about it. We have to build I don't know if requirements change is the right word, but fundamentally it comes down to quality control, right, at some level. And when I'm very aware that when we're working on co-development, we're helping out a Call of Duty team, or we're working with a publisher, all these things. They have a lot of expertise in infrastructure, and they have a lot of quality control mechanisms built in. That's we don't have that. As we try and go, as we sort of cut out the middleman potentially, we don't have that. So the first thing is, just because we're developing our own games does not necessarily mean that we are self-publishing, right? Those are really two separate things. We certainly could, and we certainly consider that option, but I am, I would say I'm more aware than most game developers given my sort of publishing background, of the challenges of publishing, marketing, branding, promotions, community management, all these different things. I think I know better than at least most people that I know in game development what I don't know. So in that respect, you take things one step at a time. There is absolutely no requirement that we self-publish and that we take on all of those risks and all those burdens at once. So we're gonna narrow the risk down to a set of risks that we're comfortable with. And we're gonna work to put systems in place to manage those risks and not try and bite off more than we can chew. That's the real answer, and everything else gets into the nuance of, well, what systems are you going to in place? How are you going to do your own quality control? What have you done wrong in the past that you're going to change? It's a very involved topic, but I guarantee you it is absolutely top of mind, because we're making big investments in our own titles right now, and I want those investments to pay off. Right? This is not experimenting. This is not dabbling. There's a few people from CA in the room here. They know that some of this is starting to come to fruition. We're starting to get some real traction, and some of those investments are starting to pay off. So the strategy is working. We certainly have a long way to go. Okay, I think we had a question over here.
So with the acquisitions of indie development by a lot of larger companies like Google and Facebook and things like that, and then the inevitable closing down of indie studios that don't quite make it, what advice do you have for people who are founding their own studios, particularly for programmers, artists, people who don't have a business background?
Sure.
And who don't have really a nuance for it itself?
Yeah. So, I don't have a business background. I certainly got some expertise. I gained some experience through exposure at Bungie, because there were a lot of things that they did right. So, and there's a number of things that I think they did right that I've tried to emulate. Right, and there's a number of things they did wrong that I've actually tried to fix. You can look at your experience, and you certainly can learn from it, whether you've been in a business ownership position, a strategic decision-maker position, and that you have experiences, good and bad, that you can apply, first of all. But second of all, I will say, everyone takes a different path, but the path that has worked for me, that ultimately I feel like has kind of led to me feeling like I'm a pretty good businessman, is fundamentally don't put all your eggs in one basket. And that is a chronic mistake that most people that are starting up a game company make. They put all of their eggs in one basket, right? They're only making one game, and it's do or die. It's make it or break it. If this game isn't a hit, we're going to go out of business, right? They have critical dependencies on just one partner, and if that partner decides to breach their contract or not play nice, they're utterly, completely at their mercy. You always got to hedge your bet. You always got to have a plan B. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. That has been my philosophy from day one. When I started Certain Affinity, we were a multi-project studio with multiple different partners from day one, and that has served me very well, because we've been very successful. We've been profitable every year. I guarantee you, probably every other year of our history, we've had something happen that, had we had all of our eggs in one basket, it would have seriously damaged us, if not put us out of business. So that is the most, very high level, that's the most valuable advice I think I can offer to anyone who's trying to start up a game company.
That might be it right there. Has it occurred to you that you might actually be better at managing those relationships than most game companies that are mostly just focused on a project and maybe two?
There's a definitely, for what we do, there's a mindset that goes into helping other people, right? You're doing co-development, you're kind of downstream, you're a service organization to a certain extent. There's a mindset that goes, and you have to filter the people very carefully to make sure you can't bring big egos in the door because they're guaranteed to clash with the client, and the client will always win. The client ultimately pays the bills, so the client is always right even when they're wrong, right? So you have to, you build a group of like-minded people, you train people to be able to manage that, you monitor it carefully. That's the service industry to a certain extent. That's not for everyone, right? There are very different models out there, but one thing that is true, it does not matter if you're a service, you got your dream publishing deal with the big publishers providing all the money, and it's not co-development. At the end of the day, it's all about control. The person who has control ultimately has the power, and you need to be careful and you need to be respectful when you're dealing with the people that have the power. That's just basic 101 in my mind. So, okay, maybe we'll do one last question. All right, go ahead, you're it.
Okay. I'm wondering for when you're in the process of making a video game, as far as a music composer goes, like for making music for the game, what are like the top qualities you look for in that composer, that musician?
So the honest answer is it's not something that I personally have dealt with a whole ton. We've done music for our own games here and there, and actually, literally, there's a contract on my desk for a composer right now ready to sign for something that we're doing. So I have a little bit of experience in it, but because I've been on the multiplayer side a lot, I don't have a ton of experience with it. I'm figuring that out myself. I told our audio director the other day, I had put forth a candidate who's a friend of mine as a composer, and he's done some work for us in the past. And I had to caveat it, and I hope he's not watching this because I don't want to insult him, but I had to caveat it with saying, I genuinely don't know whether I know he's a good composer, but I don't know if he's a great composer, and I don't know how to evaluate it. So there's some learning that I need to do. It's uncharted waters, right? It's new territory that, we're always learning. Every day, it's new experiences. This is an area that I'm, tip of the spear right now, and I'm having to learn. So for me, what I did is I actually deferred to our audio director. I said, I'm telling you, yes, this guy's a friend of mine. Yes, I brought him in the door. Yes, I recommended him. If you tell me he is not great, then I don't care that he's a friend of mine. We will not work with him because I demand greatness from this guy. And what's going to be the judge of greatness? I'm going to be the judge of greatness. If I love it, then we're awesome. If I don't love it, I don't care that you're my buddy. Sorry, not going to work out. So now you get into what are the criteria that I'm going to love. That starts to become very personal, very esoteric, very tied into what my specific strategy is as the creative director, which I am on one of our games right now. But I imagine everyone is different. So sorry, that's probably not the really helpful answer that you're looking for, but that's where I'm at, right? And that's something that I'm exploring and I'm trying to learn about right now. One interesting thing, for our new facility, Certain Affinity's new building, we're actually building out an entire audio development space. So it's a little AV suite with 4 different labs and voice recording and all that stuff. So it's something that we plan on getting into much more seriously moving forward. As we do our own games and more and more self-sufficient, there's just a bunch of things that we either have never done or we've only dabbled in. Or we never do cinematics, for instance. Nobody hires us to do cinematics. So we got to learn, if we are going to have any in-game or otherwise, we got to learn that. We got to either hire that talent or we got to learn how to do it ourselves, right? So, I've been doing this 20 years now, and there's still a lot of things that I don't know, and I think that's true of everyone. We all have something to learn, and every day I make mistakes and I learn from them. And on that note, thank you everybody. Appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, you have spent a good 2 hours with us, and thank you very much for spending that time. We will be back here second Thursday of June. Gordon, what day is that? Do you know?
I forget.
Yeah. Look in your calendars. It'll always be the second Thursday. We do have stuff planned at least a whole month in advance, so we look forward to seeing you there. And please drive home safe. And if you haven't, please check in at the gate. If you parked in the underground parking, you'll want to get a validation ticket from them, so you can pay $5 instead of 20. All right?
Thank you, Joe. Thanks, John.
That's a lot of talking.
Yes.
Cool story, bro.
Thanks,
Thanks, bro.
Yeah. Much better when they see it.
Yeah, now that they see it.
Just like that. But there's
Keep trying.
I'm
Pretty cool because, like you said, I never get to hear
there's so many good resources.
I wanted to be my son, Ben. This is He's a wonderful little dog. Keep showing me pictures of it and everything about that.
Last week, so
Yeah, that was a story. Like a month without.
it's like working.